Under the soft glow of the morning sun, Amara walked barefoot along the banks of the river that had nurtured her entire life. The villagers often marveled at her presence, for even in her quietest moments, there was a gentle radiance about her, a kind of inner calm that seemed to harmonize with the flowing waters. She had grown up listening to the river's whispers, learning its moods, and discovering patterns in the currents that spoke to her in ways only she seemed to understand. From a young age, Amara had noticed how the water would swirl more energetically when she approached, as though recognizing her steps and greeting her with familiar waves. When she hummed soft melodies, the river responded with subtle ripples, and the occasional dance of sunlight on the surface felt like a private applause for her presence. Her connection to the river was more than a simple bond. It was as if the waters themselves acknowledged her empathy and goodness. Amara could sense when the river was troubled, perhaps anticipating floods or droughts before anyone else. She would quietly move along its banks, whispering reassurances and offering small gestures of care, removing debris, guiding fish to safer waters, or planting saplings along the edges to strengthen the soil. The villagers often noticed that crops nearest the river seemed to flourish when Amara was around, attributing the health of the fields to the river's favor. Many spoke in hushed tones, saying that those who possess true purity of heart often have forces in nature aligned with them. In Amara's case, the river was not just a river, it was a protector, a companion, and a mirror reflecting the goodness that lay within her soul. Amara's beauty was simple yet radiant. Her dark hair flowed like the river itself, and her eyes mirrored the water's shifting colors, sometimes deep and calm, sometimes sparkling like sunlight on ripples. Her presence inspired both admiration and envy. While the villagers adored her gentle ways, her stepmother, Sira, and stepsister, Nima, viewed her with growing bitterness. Sira, with her own rigid sense of pride, saw Amara's natural grace as a threat to her authority within the household. Nima, though younger and less cunning, absorbed her mother's disdain and began to resent Amara's effortless charm and the admiration she garnered. They whispered behind closed doors, plotting small schemes to undermine her confidence and diminish her influence over the villagers and the river itself. Yet, despite their envy and subtle cruelty, Amara remained unfaltering, her heart steadfast in kindness and generosity. Each day, as Amara moved along the river, she reflected on the stories her late mother had told her. Tales of guardians, of spirits that watched over those who acted with courage and compassion. Her mother had spoken often of the river's protective nature, explaining that when one's intentions were pure, even natural forces would align to assist, shield, and guide. Amara carried these lessons in her heart, practicing them quietly and humbly, never boasting of her connection or seeking recognition. This humility endeared her further to the villagers, many of whom began to consult her in times of need, seeking advice about crops, health, and decisions that required wisdom. The river seemed to respond to Amara's presence as if it recognized a kindred spirit, sometimes rippling gently to greet her, sometimes casting reflections that mirrored her emotions, and occasionally revealing hidden paths along its banks for her to explore. These moments were her solace, a quiet companionship that offered peace in a world where envy and jealousy lurked nearby. Though Sira and Nima schemed to cloud her life with manipulation, Amara's bond with the river remained untouched, a source of strength that whispered of protection, resilience, and unseen support. By the time the sun reached its peak, Amara would often sit by the water's edge, her feet dipped into the cool currents, listening and speaking softly as if conversing with an old friend. She understood that true strength came not from defiance or anger but from patience, empathy, and harmony with the world around her. The villagers watched her with quiet reverence, recognizing that the girl was different in ways they could not fully explain, a blessing to their community and a symbol of hope. Even Sira and Nima, in moments when envy did not cloud their judgment, had to acknowledge, if only to themselves, that the river seemed to obey Amara in ways it obeyed no one else. As the day drew to a close, Amara rose, brushing her hands and feet clean of river mud, and looked out across the shimmering waters. The whispers among the villagers echoed in her mind, that the river protected those with pure hearts. She smiled gently, knowing that her bond with the flowing waters was both a privilege and a responsibility, a silent pact of care, courage, and compassion that would guide her through the trials to come, no matter what shadows her stepfamily might cast. The household had grown tense over the weeks since Amara had begun to draw the villagers' attention with her quiet wisdom and gentle nature. Though she never sought recognition, her connection to the river, her ability to sense its moods and respond with care, had become the talk of the village. Farmers whispered about how the crops closest to the river thrived, and mothers spoke of the way Amara could calm frightened children with the same gentle patience she showed the flowing waters. While many villagers admired her, not everyone welcomed her influence. In the shadows of the home, Sira, Amara's stepmother, watched with simmering jealousy, each glance filled with resentment. Sira had never been cruel overtly. Her beauty and social standing demanded a careful presentation to the villagers. Yet beneath her composed exterior, envy gnawed at her. She noticed how the villagers' eyes lingered on Amara, how their respect for her mother's teachings naturally extended to the girl, and how her stepsister, Nima, seemed diminished by comparison. Sira's mind churned with resentment, a growing obsession to assert dominance over the household and redirect the admiration that naturally gravitated toward Amara. She feared that the river, the villagers, and even fate itself favored the child not by her own doing but by a lineage of virtue and purity that Sira could neither claim nor influence. To counter this, Sira began subtle manipulations. She whispered doubts into the ears of neighbors, casting Amara's bond with the river as potentially dangerous. "The girl draws too much attention," she would say in casual conversations, her voice laced with feigned concern. "The river is a living force, and such fascination can invite spirits and misfortune." Though she spoke as though worried for the village's safety, her true intent was to instill fear and suspicion, to tarnish Amara's reputation before it grew too strong. At home, Sira favored Nima in every visible way. She lavished her daughter with praise, gifts, and attention, constantly reminding Amara of her lower status in the household hierarchy. Chores were assigned to Amara with unnecessary harshness, and small failures were magnified, while Nima's mistakes were excused or ignored entirely. Sira took care to maintain appearances, presenting herself as a fair and loving mother to the village while secretly sowing seeds of discord and comparison. Nima absorbed these lessons, slowly internalizing a sense of entitlement and superiority, even as she remained dependent on Sira's approval. Amara, however, noticed the change without resentment. She could feel the tension thickening the air around her, hear the whispered judgments of her stepmother, and sense Nima's occasional coldness. Yet she met each slight with patience and humility, understanding that anger would only feed Sira's sense of control. Instead, Amara turned inward, relying on the river for solace and guidance. The water seemed to mirror her calm, and she often spent hours near its banks, listening to its subtle currents and reflecting on how best to navigate the growing hostility at home. Even as Sira spread her rumors, Amara's compassionate nature began to influence others subtly. Some villagers, though curious about the whispers, continued to observe Amara's interactions with the river and the community. They noticed the gentleness in her actions, the humility with which she offered guidance, and the unassuming way she carried her growing responsibilities. Slowly, her steadfastness began to counter the whispered fears, planting doubt in the minds of those who might have been swayed by Sira's manipulations. At night, Amara would sit quietly by her window, gazing at the reflection of the river under the moonlight. She considered Sira's jealousy and Nima's insecurity not as personal failures or attacks but as challenges to be met with understanding and wisdom. She knew that her strength lay not in confrontation but in remaining true to herself, in honoring the bond she shared with the river, and in continuing to act with kindness despite the envy surrounding her. The lessons of patience, empathy, and steadfastness became her guiding principles, as powerful as the river currents themselves. By maintaining her humility and compassion, Amara began to create a quiet but undeniable shift within the household. Nima, exposed to her stepsister's grace and consistency, started to question the lessons instilled by her mother. Even Sira, though blind with envy, could not ignore the influence Amara held over the village and the subtle ways her own plans were losing traction. Amara's presence became a balancing force, demonstrating that pure intentions and steady heart could withstand jealousy, rumor, and malice, transforming tension into an unspoken truth that the household could neither deny nor suppress. Through every whispered accusation and every attempt to undermine her, Amara's heart remained compassionate and humble. Her connection to the river strengthened, and her bond with the villagers deepened, laying the groundwork for a transformation that would extend far beyond the confines of her household. Even in the face of envy and manipulation, Amara's steadfastness became a quiet force, one that would soon show that true strength and influence arise not from coercion or fear, but from patience, integrity, and the enduring power of a kind heart. The morning sun cast golden light across the river, illuminating the smooth currents and sparkling ripples that danced across its surface. Villagers began to gather along the banks, murmuring among themselves, curiosity mingling with unease. Some had heard Sira's accusations, whispered rumors of Amara's supposed dangerous influence over the river, and now they watched to see what would unfold. Others were drawn by fascination, eager to witness the girl whose quiet grace and rumored bond with the river had captured so many hearts. There was tension in the air, a mixture of expectation and doubt, as the river glistened like a mirror reflecting both the sun and the emotions of those who had come to witness. Sira appeared first, her steps measured and deliberate, followed by Nima, whose eyes betrayed a mix of apprehension and anticipation. The stepmother's plan was precise. She would force Amara to kneel by the river, a public display meant to assert control, humiliate her stepdaughter, and satisfy the villagers' curiosity. To Sira, this was both a demonstration of authority and a punishment. It would remind everyone that Amara's beauty, connection, and influence were secondary to the household hierarchy she imposed. Nima followed closely, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, eager to witness her stepsister's discomfort and internalize the lessons of dominance Sira sought to teach. Amara approached the riverbank slowly, her steps deliberate yet unhurried. She carried no fear in her heart, no protest on her lips. Though she sensed the whispers and saw the judgmental glances, her spirit remained steady, anchored in the lessons of patience and humility her mother had instilled in her. She knelt at the water's edge, letting the cool flow lap gently against her feet. The sensation was familiar, comforting, and grounding. The river welcomed her presence as it always had, responding to her stillness and sincerity. She lowered her head slightly, folding her hands in her lap, embodying the obedience Sira demanded without resentment or defiance. The villagers watched in a mixture of awe and skepticism. Some whispered that the girl's calmness was remarkable, noting how her posture and demeanor reflected inner strength rather than submission. Others questioned whether the display would yield some tangible result, wondering if the river itself would react to the tension surrounding its banks. Children, their eyes wide with curiosity, pointed at the shimmering water, sensing the subtle magic that seemed to linger around Amara. Even those who had been swayed by Sira's warnings felt a strange pull toward the quiet dignity of the girl kneeling at the river's edge. Sira's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and commanding. "Kneel, Amara," she said, her tone layered with authority and expectation. "Show your humility and prove that you are obedient to this household. Let the villagers witness that your pride is no match for duty." Nima echoed the command, her voice less steady but equally insistent, reinforcing the pressure on her stepsister. The air seemed heavy with tension, and the river, though calm, reflected the energy of the gathering crowd, each ripple catching glimmers of sunlight like scattered jewels. Amara's heart remained steady despite the scrutiny. She did not kneel out of fear or submission. She knelt as a gesture of peace, a reflection of her connection to the river and the lessons of compassion and integrity she carried within her. As her knees pressed gently into the soft earth, the currents swirled around her feet, responding to her presence in subtle, mesmerizing patterns. The water shimmered under the sunlight, mirroring her calm heart and unwavering spirit. Every ripple seemed to whisper encouragement, an affirmation of her dignity and the truth of her intentions. Some villagers leaned forward, their eyes narrowing in curiosity, noticing the unusual interaction between girl and river. They began to murmur among themselves, questioning the rumors and re-evaluating what they had been told. Even as Sira glared, frustrated by the lack of visible humiliation, the river's response silently contradicted her narrative. The current seemed to rise gently around Amara's feet, curling in soft eddies as if paying homage to her composure and the sincerity of her heart. Time seemed to stretch as Amara remained kneeling, neither flinching nor wavering. The sun climbed higher, casting brighter reflections on the water, illuminating every ripple and movement as though nature itself bore witness to the trial. Villagers, initially drawn by the promise of spectacle, found themselves captivated by the serene power emanating from the kneeling girl. Even Sira, confident in her authority, felt a twinge of unease as she watched the intended act of humiliation transform into a subtle display of Amara's quiet strength. Finally, after what felt like hours though only minutes had passed, the murmurs shifted. The villagers replaced their curiosity, the skepticism replaced by a silent acknowledgement of Amara's steadfastness. The river's gentle lap against her feet became a chorus of affirmation, a natural declaration that true humility was not submission to cruelty but an alignment of heart, spirit, and nature. Amara rose slowly, her posture dignified, her eyes reflecting the river's shimmer. Though Sira's intentions had been to humiliate, the river had spoken in its own way, bowing only to the purity of Amara's heart, leaving both the villagers and her stepmother with an undeniable truth. The girl who knelt with integrity held a quiet, unassailable power far greater than fear or envy. Amara's knees pressed gently into the cool riverbank, the soft earth damp beneath her as she bowed her head, letting the morning sun illuminate the rippling waters before her. Though Sira and Nima's eyes burned with expectation, their malice unable to sway her, Amara's mind and heart were far from them, focused instead on the river that had nurtured her spirit from birth. She whispered softly, not as a command but as a conversation born of trust and love. "I feel your flow, your strength, your patience," she murmured. "Guide me, sustain me, and teach me what the world cannot yet understand." Her voice blended with the gentle murmur of the water, the syllables almost swallowed by the soft rush of currents, yet carried with clarity in the sacred space she shared with the river. At first, the water remained calm, reflecting the sunlight in quiet patterns that mirrored the movements of the reeds along its edges. Then, subtly, almost imperceptibly, the currents began to respond. Tiny eddies formed around Amara's feet, swirling in delicate circles that seemed to echo her words, as if the river itself were listening, processing, and answering. The movement was hypnotic, rhythmic, and entirely unlike the ordinary flow of the day's waters. She tilted her head, eyes glinting with curiosity and recognition, sensing that this was more than coincidence. The river was alive in ways that transcended mere water, attuned to her thoughts and feelings, acknowledging her sorrow and her hope with a language only the heart could understand. Amara's whispers grew bolder, carrying fragments of her inner life, the confusion and sadness at her stepmother's envy, the longing for understanding and acceptance, the quiet desire to protect the village and the people she cared for. "I do not seek revenge," she said softly, her breath mingling with the mist rising from the water. "I seek only to honor what is true and good." The river shifted in response, gentle waves rising and falling with deliberate precision, almost as if it were shaping itself around the intentions in her heart. The sunlight caught the ripples, scattering glittering reflections onto her hands and knees, a subtle acknowledgement of her sincerity. The villagers, gathered along the banks, murmured among themselves, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Some whispered in awe, noting the intricate dance of the currents and the subtle glow that seemed to emanate from the water's surface. Children pointed excitedly, eyes wide with wonder, while elders exchanged knowing glances, as though recalling stories of old when nature itself would respond to those whose hearts were pure. Even Sira's face, painted with forced confidence, betrayed a flicker of unease as she observed the currents bend and swirl around Amara in a manner that could not be explained by wind or stone. Amara continued to whisper, her voice now carrying threads of hope for the future and dreams she had nurtured since childhood. She spoke of harmony between humans and the river, of respect and care for all living things that depended on its flow. Each word seemed to ripple through the water, sending waves that met the farthest reeds and stones, weaving a subtle message that resonated with those who had eyes to see and hearts to feel. The river's movement became more pronounced, eddies forming intricate spirals that pulsed with an almost musical cadence, as though the water was communicating in response to her presence. As she kneeled, Amara felt the full depth of their connection. It was not merely a child's imagination or a whimsical fancy, but a tangible bond that transcended ordinary understanding. The water seemed to remember every moment she had spent along its banks, every song she had hummed, every care she had taken to protect its health and nurture its flow. In return, it recognized her empathy and strength, answering with a language that required no words, no explanation, only trust and the purity of intention. Even the skeptical villagers could no longer deny what they saw. The river appeared to bend and dance around her, guiding her presence as if honoring a sacred covenant. The currents lapped gently against her hands and knees, forming patterns that mimicked the intricate designs of stars scattered across the heavens. Some whispered that the river recognized the bloodline of her mother, a lineage of guardians and protectors, while others marveled at the undeniable bond between girl and nature. Sira and Nima, their faces hardened by jealousy, found themselves at a loss, witnessing a truth they could neither disprove nor control. Hours seemed to pass in a quiet rhythm, punctuated by the soft murmur of water and the delicate whispers of Amara's voice. She felt no fear, no resentment, only a profound sense of understanding and unity. Each wave that swirled around her feet carried affirmation. The river had heard her, it had seen the purity of her intentions, and it would stand with her in ways beyond human comprehension. Her heart expanded with gratitude, and she realized that this connection, this sacred understanding with the river, was more powerful than any household quarrel or whispered rumor. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the currents, Amara finally lifted her gaze, meeting the eyes of the villagers who had gathered, their awe evident in their expressions. She felt the river's energy coursing gently through her, a steady reassurance that no envy, no cruelty, and no force could diminish the bond she shared with the waters. The river whispered in its own way, a living testament to the truth that guided her. Compassion, patience, and integrity held power far greater than malice, and that the gentle heart, when aligned with nature and purpose, could move even the currents themselves. The morning air hung heavy with anticipation, the villagers' murmurs creating a low hum along the riverbank. Amara remained kneeling, her hands lightly brushing the cool water as she whispered her quiet thoughts, her connection with the river deepening with each passing moment. Suddenly, without warning, the currents began to swell, rising gently but deliberately around her feet. The water curled and spiraled, forming smooth arcs that glistened in the sunlight like molten silver. The river, which had always seemed alive in a subtle, comforting way, now displayed a brilliance that made the villagers' hearts skip. They gasped collectively, some stepping back in fear, others leaning forward in astonishment, their eyes wide as they struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Amara remained calm, her steady heart anchoring the unfolding miracle. She could feel the river's intent, a protective and responsive force that reflected the purity of her spirit. The currents licked at her ankles without causing discomfort, rising higher as if in acknowledgement of her unwavering kindness and humility. Tiny ripples shimmered with light, sparkling like stars scattered across the water's surface, creating an ethereal glow that painted her kneeling form with an aura of quiet majesty. The spectacle was unlike anything the villagers had ever seen, a fluid dance of light and water intertwined with the essence of Amara herself. Sira's face contorted with disbelief and fear, her carefully composed demeanor unraveling in the presence of something beyond her understanding. Nima clutched at her mother's sleeve, her own eyes wide, a mixture of awe and uncertainty mirrored in her expression. "It cannot be," Sira whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to maintain control. This is unnatural." But Amara did not flinch, she had no need to command or explain. The river acted on its own accord, responding solely to the alignment of her heart and intentions. The villagers, initially skeptical, now stood in collective wonder. Their eyes followed the rising currents, mesmerized by the way the water seemed to curl and flow with a consciousness of its own. It was as if the river recognized the injustice Amara had endured, the jealousy and cruelty she had silently endured, and now responded in a display of protective reverence. The shimmering light danced across the ripples, reflecting her spirit's unwavering purity. Some whispered prayers under their breath, while others simply watched, unable to speak as the scene unfolded like a living vision of truth and power. Amara's heart remained open and humble even as the water rose higher, never touching her with force or harm. She spoke softly to the river, her whispers melding with the gentle gurgle of the currents. "I do not wish to harm anyone," she said, "only to honor the truth and protect what is right." The river pulsed in response, light flowing through the eddies in gentle waves that seemed to radiate understanding and acceptance. Each swirl mirrored the cadence of her thoughts, affirming the bond between her spirit and the waters that had nurtured her since childhood. The rising waters formed a protective arc around her, almost as if embracing her kneeling form in a liquid sanctuary. Children gasped and pointed, eyes wide with wonder as tiny droplets of light shimmered from the currents like diamonds scattered across a flowing canvas. Elders nodded knowingly, recognizing the signs of a sacred bond between human and nature, a rare and powerful manifestation that spoke to forces beyond the ordinary. Even some of Sira's followers who had once echoed her jealous whispers, began to shift uneasily, unsure how to interpret the miraculous display before them. The river's currents seemed to respond not only to Amara's presence but also to the balance she maintained within her heart. Where envy and malice sought to influence her, the waters remained untroubled, guided only by the purity of her intent. Each rise of the currents, each shimmer of light across the water, reinforced the lesson that true power lay not in coercion or fear, but in humility, patience, and compassion. The villagers began to murmur among themselves, acknowledging that something extraordinary had occurred, that the river itself had recognized the child who had knelt with integrity and reverence. Sira, though desperate to reassert control, could not deny what unfolded before her eyes. The water's shimmering arcs seemed to defy her authority, rising in gentle waves that honored Amara's spirit rather than her commands. Nima, observing her stepsister's unshakable poise and the river's graceful response, began to feel a mixture of awe and unease, sensing that the world's balance had shifted in ways she had never imagined. As the currents gradually settled, curling softly around Amara's feet, the light continued to shimmer, leaving a lingering aura that spoke to the villagers' hearts. They realized that what they had witnessed was not mere spectacle, but a profound acknowledgement of virtue, a miraculous affirmation that even in the face of cruelty and envy, integrity and purity could elicit the most extraordinary of responses from the world itself. Amara rose slowly, water cascading gently from her hands and knees, her spirit calm and unwavering, leaving the villagers with a vision that would be remembered for generations. The river had risen not to harm but to honor, reflecting the brilliance of a heart untarnished and a soul aligned with truth. The crowd that had gathered by the riverside stood frozen in disbelief. The once murmuring current now glimmered with an otherworldly light, bending softly before Amara as though the river itself had knelt at her feet. The water curved, forming a circle around her, calm and reverent, its ripples whispering her name in hushed tones that only nature could speak. Sira's breath caught in her throat. Her hand trembled as she gripped her daughter Nima's arm, but even Nima seemed unable to move. The confidence and cruelty that had always filled their faces melted into pale astonishment. Amara rose slowly, her soaked dress clinging to her, but her posture was serene, almost regal. The river's glow reflected in her eyes, turning them into mirrors of light and water. The villagers, who had come to witness her humiliation, now fell silent, the shame of their curiosity settling upon them. Even the wind seemed to still. All that moved was the shimmering current, which rippled like it was alive, aware, protective and loyal. Sira's lips quivered as she tried to speak. This is witchcraft," she stammered, her voice brittle. "The girl has bewitched the river." But her words carried no conviction. Even she could hear the tremor of fear lacing through them. The people turned toward her, not with agreement but with doubt. A few shook their heads. Old Mama Koma, the village elder, took a step forward and whispered, "No witch commands the river's mercy. Only the pure can call its calm." The truth of that statement struck deep into the hearts of all who heard. Nima's eyes darted nervously between her mother and Amara. She had always believed her mother's stories, that Amara's beauty was dangerous, that her kindness was a mask for deceit. But now, standing before a miracle, her certainty shattered. The river's glow reflected on her tear-filled eyes, and for the first time she felt small, not because of Amara's grace but because of her own envy. Amara did not gloat or raise her voice. She looked at her stepmother and stepsister with sorrow, not triumph. "Mother," she said softly, "the river only mirrors what is in our hearts. If we bring it hatred, it stirs in anger. If we offer peace, it flows gently." Her words carried across the still air, touching everyone who heard them. They were not the words of a frightened girl, but of someone who understood something far greater, something eternal. Sira's heart pounded in her chest. For years she had built her pride upon lies and favoritism, believing that cruelty was strength and compassion was weakness. Yet here stood Amara, the girl she had tried to break, surrounded by the river's reverence. She could feel the villagers' gazes on her, their silent judgment heavy like stones. Nima shrank behind her, ashamed. Suddenly, a small wave rippled from the center of the river and splashed gently at Sira's feet. It was not harsh, but it carried a chill that sank deep into her bones. Her breath hitched as she stepped back, but the river's light did not fade, it only shimmered brighter around Amara. The message was clear, though unspoken. The river recognized the innocent and revealed the guilty. Amara bowed her head slightly as if in prayer. The glow around her dimmed into a soft, golden shimmer before the water began to recede, returning peacefully to its course. Birds that had fled during the rising now returned to the trees, and the sound of rustling leaves filled the silence. The spell, or whatever it had been, was broken, yet the reverence lingered. A child among the crowd whispered, "The river bowed to her." The words spread like wind through the villagers until murmurs turned into awe. Many fell to their knees, not before Amara, but before the miracle they had witnessed. A reminder that nature listened to those who were pure of spirit. Sira could bear it no longer. She turned sharply, dragging Nima by the arm, and hurried away from the riverbank. But even as she walked, she could feel the villagers' eyes following her, and worse, the river's quiet hum still echoing in her mind, a song she could not silence, one that told her she had been wrong. Amara remained at the edge of the water, watching as the river returned to stillness. She felt no pride, only peace. The river had not risen for her glory, it had risen to reveal truth. Behind her, the villagers began to approach slowly, some bowing their heads, others weeping softly, moved by the divine calm that lingered in the air. In that moment, the river's child stood radiant and unafraid, her connection to nature unbroken, her spirit untainted by the cruelty that had tried to destroy her. And though Sira and Nima fled with their shame, everyone in the village knew, Amara had not just been blessed by the river. She had become its reflection. Days passed after the miracle by the riverside, and though the village slowly returned to its rhythm, nothing felt quite the same. The air seemed fresher, the nights calmer, and the river, once an ordinary stream, now glowed faintly under the moon, as though it remembered the girl who had knelt at its edge. Amara spent her mornings by the bank, listening to its soft murmurs. Each ripple carried whispers only she could understand, and through them she began to learn the deeper truths the river held. The river no longer spoke to her only of sorrow or comfort, it began to teach. When Amara touched the water, she felt its pulse beneath her fingertips, strong yet gentle, like a living heart that had seen centuries of human folly and forgiveness. It showed her how everything in life flowed in cycles, how storms always gave way to calm, how even the harshest droughts ended in renewal. She realized that the river's wisdom was not just in its strength, but in its patience. It could wear down mountains, yet it did so quietly, drop by drop. Each evening, Amara shared what she learned with the villagers. She would sit on a smooth stone beneath a great fig tree near the riverbank, and children would gather around her. "The river teaches us balance," she told them one dusk as the sun sank low. "When we take too much, it grows restless. When we give thanks, it flows in peace." Her voice carried a gentle authority now, and even the elders listened with respect. The same people who once watched her humiliation now came to her for guidance, bringing their doubts and griefs like pebbles to be washed clean by her calm presence. When an elderly woman's crops began to fail, Amara guided her to collect river water at dawn and whisper gratitude into it before watering her field. Weeks later, the plants began to bloom again. When a child fell ill with fever, Amara soaked a cloth in the cool river and laid it upon his forehead while murmuring the river's song. By the next sunrise the fever broke. The villagers called it magic, but Amara only smiled. "It is not magic," she said. "It is harmony. The river listens to those who listen to it." Sira and Nima, too, could not escape the reach of Amara's newfound grace. Though shame had driven them into silence, guilt followed like a shadow. Nima often stood at a distance, watching Amara from behind the trees, torn between envy and admiration. One morning she approached timidly as Amara filled a clay jar by the river. "Do you still speak to it?" she asked hesitantly. Amara looked up, her expression soft and forgiving. "Every day," she said. "And it speaks to you too if you let it." Nima lowered her gaze, her voice small. "It would not listen to someone like me." Amara smiled gently. "It listens to everyone, but not everyone listens back." She handed her the jar, the sunlight reflecting between them. For the first time Nima smiled, shy, uncertain but real. That simple exchange marked the beginning of healing, not just for the river, but for the broken family itself. As the weeks turned into months, the riverbank transformed into a sanctuary. Fishermen began offering flowers before casting their nets. Women sang river songs while washing clothes, their melodies echoing through the valley. Children learned to thank the water before drinking. The once divided village had begun to live in rhythm with the flow of nature, and Amara's teachings became part of their daily life. At night, when the stars reflected on the water's surface, Amara would sit quietly, feeling the same pulse she'd felt since the day the river bowed before her. She no longer saw it as something outside herself, it was within her, in every heartbeat and breath. She understood now that to live in harmony was to move like water, to be gentle yet strong, yielding yet unstoppable. Sometimes she thought of her late father, remembering how he used to tell her that the river held the memory of every soul that had ever touched it. She realized that he was right. The river did not just flow through the land, it flowed through generations, carrying lessons of patience, forgiveness, and renewal. As the moon rose higher, the water shimmered with silver light, and the night wind carried a whisper to her ears. It was not words, but she understood it all the same: gratitude. The river thanked her, not for her power, but for her heart. And so, Amara became known not as the girl who made the river rise, but as the woman who taught her people to listen, to the water, to the earth, and to the quiet strength within their own souls. In every drop of rain, in every flowing stream, her lessons lived on, soft, steady, eternal, like the river's song that never ceased to flow. The seasons changed, and with them the entire village began to transform. What had once been a place heavy with gossip, envy, and silent rivalry now pulsed with renewed life. Under Amara's quiet guidance, the air itself seemed lighter, carrying the scent of blossoms and fresh rain. The river that had once risen in fury now flowed with a tranquil gleam, its waters clear enough to mirror the sky. The villagers began to believe that the river's calm reflected Amara's own spirit, steady, forgiving, and endlessly giving. Crops that had withered in previous years now grew lush and strong. Maize stretched tall in the fields, and fruit trees bent low with abundance. The people no longer took the land for granted, Before every harvest, they gathered by the river to offer thanks. Amara taught them small rituals of gratitude, a handful of grain cast into the water, a whispered prayer, a promise to care for the earth as it cared for them. When you honor the river, she told them one morning as dawn painted gold across the ripples, you honor life itself. The fishermen who had once struggled to find food now returned home with nets heavy and hearts light. They said that the fish swam closer to the shore as if drawn by kindness. Children played near the riverbanks again, their laughter echoing like birdsong. Mothers washed clothes while humming the songs Amara had taught, soft tunes of renewal that carried far across the breeze. The entire village seemed to breathe together, moving as one heartbeat. Amara became the quiet center of it all. She never sought praise, yet people came to her for every decision, every blessing. When a child fell ill, she listened to the rhythm of the water before choosing which herbs to mix. When disputes arose, she gathered both sides near the river's edge, letting its steady murmur cool their tempers. Somehow, its flow turned anger into reflection and reflection into peace. The villagers began to call her the daughter of the river, a title spoken with both reverence and affection. Even Sira and Nima could not deny the change that surrounded them. Their bitterness had once poisoned their hearts, but the river's calm had begun to seep into their souls. One morning when Sira went to fetch water, she saw her reflection in the river, older, wearier but softened. She thought of the cruelty she had inflicted on Amara and felt the sting of shame. For a long time she stood there, listening to the water's endless motion, until finally she whispered, "Forgive me." The river's ripples shimmered gently as if acknowledging her words. That night, she approached Amara's hut with trembling hands, holding a small clay bowl of river water as an offering. Amara looked up from her herbs and smiled faintly. "The river has forgiven you," she said quietly, "and so have I." There were no grand speeches, no tears, just the steady hum of reconciliation. From that day on, the family began to heal not through punishment, but through the slow, honest work of humility. As the moon cycles turned, visitors from neighboring villages began to arrive, drawn by tales of the blessed river and the woman who had tamed it with her kindness. They brought gifts, woven mats, dried fruits, beads, and asked to learn her ways. Amara welcomed them all. She showed them how to plant with respect for the soil, how to listen before speaking, how to see strength in gentleness. Her words spread like ripples, touching places far beyond her own home. The elders of the village, once proud and dismissive, now looked to her as one of their own. They rebuilt the council hut near the river, declaring it sacred ground. There, decisions were made not in anger but in patience. The river's presence reminded them that every action carried consequences, just as every stone dropped into water sent waves far and wide. At night, when the stars shimmered above, Amara would sit on the bank with the children, telling them the stories of the river, how it listened to those who spoke with truth, how it bowed to a heart that remained pure even in cruelty. The children would listen wide-eyed, their reflections mingling with the starlight on the surface. "Remember," she told them softly, "the river is not outside us. It flows within. When you act with kindness, it hears you. When you love, it carries your light forward." Years passed, but Amara never changed. Though her hair grew streaked with silver, her presence remained serene, her spirit untouched by pride. The river, too, continued to thrive, its waters a lifeline for all who depended on it. The villagers learned that strength was not in domination or fear, but in harmony. And so, the place that once bore witness to jealousy and humiliation became a sanctuary of unity. Travelers who passed through often remarked that the river seemed to smile as it flowed, its surface glowing in ways they couldn't explain. But those who lived there understood. It was not just water they saw shimmering in the sunlight, it was the reflection of a pure heart, a reminder that peace, once found, can transform even the most wounded of lands. Under Amara's gentle guidance, the village had learned the greatest truth of all. When the heart flows like the river, giving, forgiving, and unafraid, the world itself bends in reverence. When Sira and Nima finally gathered the courage to face Amara, the river was quiet, a mirror of the dawn sky, soft and pale. They walked the same path where years ago they had watched her kneel in humiliation, but now the ground beneath their feet felt different, alive with memory and consequence. Every step echoed the weight of guilt they had carried since that day. The villagers had seen the changes Amara brought, the fertile fields, the songs of children, the shimmering peace that hung over the water, and Sira knew there was no longer any denying the truth. The very river that had once been a place of cruelty now felt sacred, and Amara stood at its center like a guardian of mercy. Sira's hands trembled as she approached. We have come to face what we deserve, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nima, standing beside her, lowered her gaze. She had once mocked Amara, calling her weak and foolish for her gentle ways. Now she could not even meet her eyes. We wronged you, Nima murmured. We let envy guide us where love should have been. Amara, who had been collecting herbs near the water, turned slowly. The morning light kissed her face and the river seemed to glow around her. But there was no anger in her expression, only a deep sadness mixed with quiet strength. You wronged yourselves more than you wronged me, she said softly. When you turned away from kindness, you cut yourselves from peace. I have already forgiven you, long before you came. Sira blinked, tears filling her eyes. Forgiven us? Even after all we did, the cruelty, the shame, the fire in our hearts. Amara nodded, kneeling beside the river and letting the water run over her fingers. The river taught me that anger is like poison, she said. If I held it within me, it would only cloud the water. But if I release it, everything becomes clear again. She gestured for them to kneel beside her. Reluctantly they did. For the first time, Sira and Nima knelt not out of pride or control, but from humility. The river lapped gently at their hands, its coolness washing over their skin like a blessing. Do you hear it? Amara asked. It forgives too. It remembers pain, but it keeps flowing. It teaches us that even after destruction, there can be renewal. Sira's tears fell freely now, mingling with the river's surface. She had once used this same river as a weapon of humiliation. Now it became her confessor, her absolution. I don't deserve your mercy, she whispered. Amara shook her head. Mercy is not something to deserve. It is something to accept. She looked up at the trees that swayed in the morning light. If I had sought revenge, I would have become what I feared. But by choosing peace, I found my strength. Nima finally looked at her stepsister, her lips trembling. You were never weak, she said. You were stronger than any of us, not because you fought but because you forgave. A faint smile touched Amara's lips. Strength is not in the voice that shouts the loudest, but in the heart that stills the storm within. The villagers who had gathered quietly along the riverbank watched in awe. They had expected punishment, perhaps a miracle to strike the cruel or a sign of judgment. Instead they saw something greater, compassion so deep it disarmed the hardest hearts. The river shimmered brighter, reflecting three kneeling women who in that moment let go of years of bitterness. Days turned into weeks, and Sira and Nima remained by the river, learning from Amara. They helped her tend the fields, fetch water for the elders and care for the sick. Slowly the villagers began to see them not as oppressors, but as two women learning redemption through humility. Sira, once proud and cunning, became quiet and observant. She began teaching the younger girls the lessons she had learned the hardest way, that beauty fades, power corrupts, but kindness endures. One evening as the sun sank and the river turned gold, Sira approached Amara once more. You have given us back our souls, she said. What can we give you in return? Amara looked at her and smiled faintly. Give the river what it asks, respect. Give others what they need most, understanding. That is enough. From that day, Sira and Nima became guardians of the river alongside Amara. They led prayers at dawn, shared food with travelers, and protected the water from waste or harm. The villagers began to follow their example, creating rituals of gratitude that lasted for generations. It was said that on certain nights, when the moonlight touched the river just right, three reflections could be seen: the daughter of the river and beside her, the two who once wronged her, now standing in peace. Together they represented the journey of all hearts, from envy to regret, from regret to forgiveness, and from forgiveness to grace. And so, the river did not just bow to Amara's feet, it rose to cradle all three women, symbols of what humanity could become when love conquers cruelty. Through Amara's compassion, the river flowed purer than ever, carrying not just water, but a truth that rippled through every life it touched, that forgiveness is the deepest kind of power, and redemption is the quiet song of a healed heart.